Hello, everyone. Welcome to the third Public Diplomacy Week, the special session, Ambassadors Dialogue, Leadership and Public Diplomacy in the Pandemic Era. And my name is Chang Jae-bok, professor at Ewha Women's University. I'm sure that all of you will agree that 2020 has been a year that we will probably remember for the rest of our lives. An entire world experiencing a deadly pandemic, the likes of which we have not seen for nearly a century. But unlike a century ago, this pandemic is happening in front of our eyes, whether it overshadows the political system in the United States, shut down pubs in Great Britain, or forces students to go to school wearing full protective gear in Korea and many of your countries. In fact, technology and the growing reach of all sorts of media really allow the world to see how each country deals with its own attack from this deadly virus, and the implications of how leadership of each country deal with this crisis have huge implications for the world and the world of public diplomacy. Now, the Public Diplomacy Week has become a really important platform and venue for sharing our public diplomacy efforts. And so it is with great pleasure that we have 4 representatives of 4 nations to talk about their leadership and what we have to strive for overall in this era of the pandemic. Welcome ambassadors from Korea, Norway, Singapore, and Germany. Let us start off with Ambassador Chang Jae-bok, Korea's ambassador for public diplomacy. Please let us know about the events of leadership in Korea in the pandemic era.
Thank you. Hello, everyone. I'm very much pleased and excited to join you for the third Public Diplomacy Week as the Ambassador for Public Diplomacy. The annual Public Diplomacy Week has now become an important platform, a venue for the promotion of public diplomacy, and also a prime example of public diplomacy itself. As part of the main programs of the Pdweek, I am confident that this Ambassador Dialogue will give us a wonderful chance to share our experience and best practices of public diplomacy, especially under the COVID-19 pandemic context. Let me start by briefly outlining Korea's experience in dealing with the pandemic. Korea was one of the first countries hit by COVID-19, but it would be safe to say that Korea is currently managing the virus in a relatively stable manner under the current trend of confirmed cases. I think this result mainly comes from our sustainable crisis management system aimed at keeping society and the borders open. We managed to do so even at the height of the pandemic, of the first wave in late February and early March, without resorting to lockdowns, suspension of public the transportation, and other large-scale restrictions. We even successfully carried out the nationwide parliamentary elections in April and reopened schools on site online, following different phases of online schooling. Vis-a-vis international community, without resorting to blanket measures like the entry ban, we have kept the borders open and guaranteed essential movement of business people by taking appropriate measures proportionate to the risk. What is central to this openness is our 3T strategy, that consists of robust testing, rigorous tracing, and the treatment. Also, civic engagement and participation and partnership have played a significant role in flattening the curve. COVID-19 has forced the governments around the world to fundamentally change their strategy and policies in various fields, and public diplomacy is not an exception. Amid the pandemic situation, we had no choice but to rearrange or cancel many events and other venues for cultural exchanges. But this transition does not necessarily mean a slowdown of public diplomacy. Rather, we are turning it into an opportunity to accelerate our path towards digital public diplomacy. My government has been devising innovative ways of public diplomacy using digital technologies such as holding speech contests through live streaming, creating digital content to introduce various faces about Korea, and expanding the digital platforms to interact and communicate with people of the world in real time. COVID-19 also gave us a chance to diversify the contents of our public diplomacy as well. Our own experience of coping with the virus has become an asset for public diplomacy. And we are sharing it with the international community through webinars and online materials. A good example of digital diplomacy under the COVID-19 context is a series of online campaigns that promote and disseminate the message of global solidarity to overcome the crisis. This effort includes the Trust campaign, which emphasizes Korea's principle in dealing with the pandemic, and the Stay Strong Relay Challenge with voluntary civic participation, which delivers the message of hope and courage to the world. I believe that foreign public's interest in Korea and our efforts will continue to grow as we come to grips with the pandemic. COVID-19 has been a painful reminder of how interdependent we all are. We also came to realize that although COVID-19 doesn't discriminate its host, socioeconomic impact is not equal to everyone. In order to leave no one behind and achieve a global prosperity together, each country should make best possible efforts to prevent and control the disease domestically and help people in need. And at the same time, we should provide assistance to the countries more vulnerable to and severely affected by the pandemic. Because there's no telling when the COVID-19 pandemic will be finally over, we have to learn to live with the virus for the time being. We must lose faith in the humanity's ability to overcome crisis and continue to muster up joint efforts in responding to COVID-19 with a long-term perspective. And I believe that is what Korea's public diplomacy should be doing, arming people with knowledge, information, courage, hope, compassion, and a sense of global solidarity. Thank you.
Thank you, Ambassador Chang. I mean, Korea has definitely caught the attention of the world, especially in the early stages with its very swift reaction to the COVID crisis. And Ambassador Chang talked about the Korea's efforts to share that knowledge with the global community. And also he gave us a lot of messages about the future, about how we should all work together towards the global peace. Now we are going to move on. Frode Solberg from Norway to tell us about Norway's reactions to the COVID pandemic. Ambassador?
Thank you very much, and thank you also for inviting me to this very important session and to share some of Norway's experience and the way we have dealt with the COVID-19 situation. Let me also say that I would like to echo many of the things that Ambassador Chang told us about the handling here in Korea, which we of course found quite useful as the wave hit Europe somewhat later than it did in Asia. Talking about the handling in Norway, we have had a relatively successful management. I think we can claim that. I think it's a number of different elements, different measures that it gives us a result. It's not one single decision or one single measure that has been decisive, but a number. I think first and foremost, we had, when the wave hit Europe, I wouldn't say if that's, it might seem wrong to call it luck, but we received many cases at once. And I think that gave us it realized that this is a big thing. We have to take it seriously, not only from the political side, but also among the population. So I think that even though it was a bad experience, it helped us create the understanding that this is something we have to deal with in the most serious way. Having said that, I think the quick response by the government and our health authorities was decisive. With a relatively quick lockdown, we didn't have to lock down all the society, but somewhat close to the measures that were taken here in Korea. I think that was very, very important, and it reduced the spreading of the COVID-19 situation quite early. Intensive testing, which we know from the Republic of Korea, was also introduced in Norway. I think that was very important. Early and intensive testing that helped contain the virus as best as possible. I also think that one thing that was very, very important was the close connection between the political leadership and the health authorities, as we have seen in Korea as well. Not only that, because this was a very unknown situation for many people, for the politicians, for the health experts. There were many unknown factors. And I think the close cooperation between the government and the different health authorities helped that situation, not only in the early stages, but also still as a very important factor. Common press conference, many common meetings, and I think that helped building trust and confidence in our population. And to a certain extent, as we have seen in many, among the world leaders, among health authorities, no one had all the answers. And I think also that being open to have, I wouldn't say to have an open discussion in the public space, but still, I think the public realized that we don't have all the answers. And this close connection between the political leadership and the health authorities, that I think built confidence in our population, which was actually quite positive. So the importance of openness and transparency in dealing with such a difficult issue, I think that was key. And that also meant that the public realized and understood we all have to take responsibility. This can't be solved only by political measures or restrictions. We have to take part. This is something that we all have to contribute to in finding a way. So many of these, so as I said, not one single element, not one single measure, but a number of these combined helped containing the situation quite early. And I think this is also proved valuable as the pandemic has moved on. This close cooperation between the political leadership and the health authorities, openness, transparency. I think also, as was touched upon, the importance of public diplomacy. To be open, transparent, that both political leaders, health authorities are present in the different platforms, social media platforms, traditional media. That is very important because information, I think for all of us in abnormal times, we need as much normality as possible and we need as much information as possible. Not always the amount of information that people would like, but to require, but to be present, to give information, facts, well-based analysis, extremely important. And I think social, digital diplomacy, public diplomacy played and still plays a very, very important part of doing that. And we see that in times where facts, information is being challenged, that this becomes even more important, to be present, to have well-balanced information from our health authorities, from political leaders. That is extremely important. So the importance of public diplomacy, the importance of digital diplomacy is just as important together. And if I may also add one final point from my side, of course, is it's always when we face these types of challenges, we have to cooperate. This is not a pandemic. It's the same like climate change. I mean, there's nothing that we can do separately. We have to do this together. So I would also like to reiterate and underline the importance of working together, cooperation, in finding the way forward in this area.
Thank you, Ambassador Solberg. You rightly point out that the pandemic really hit almost all countries like a tsunami of things. But you also point out a very important factor that Norway was able to really, the political leadership in Norway was able to work with the health experts through openness, through transparency, and really to get the whole country through this pandemic. which is a very important thing for, I think, many countries. Now, closer to home, Singapore has also been touted as one of the more successful countries that have dealt with the pandemic. Ambassador Eric Teo, please give us a little bit more about how Singapore handled it.
Thank you very much. First, let me thank the Korea Foundation for inviting me to participate in this session for its Public Diplomacy Week. I think it's an honor to be invited. This is an extremely pertinent topic, leadership and public diplomacy in the pandemic era. In my view, leadership and public diplomacy goes hand in hand. There are at least three aspects, in my view, that we need strong leadership during this time. First, I think we need strong leadership to manage the pandemic within each country. Second, we need strong leadership to make difficult decisions to manage the economic fallout from the pandemic. And also importantly, this includes finding the right balance between, on the one hand, protecting public health, and on the other hand, trying to reopen your economy. In our view, this is not zero-sum, and this is not mutually exclusive. You need to do both at the right level, but each country's right level is different, depending on your level of infections. And thirdly, strong leadership is also needed to speak out against unilateralism, to speak out against destructive rivalry, and to advocate multilateralism and international cooperation in the face of the pandemic. So I'm going to talk about these three aspects in my remarks. So first, let me start with some remarks on Singapore's strategy on managing and combating COVID-19. The key for us is actually to contain the spread of the virus in order not to overwhelm our healthcare system. And we want to prevent avoidable deaths. And we also want to protect the vulnerable, especially the senior citizens. So we have to, our government has to, as well as the people, have to make difficult decisions. So we implemented strict social distancing measures, what we call circuit breaker in Singapore, from April to June for 2 months. And schools went online, and working from home became the default mode of operation for 2 months. These strict measures, together with controlling the influx of imported cases, plus controlling the spread of the virus in the migrant worker population, has helped us to turn the situation around currently, if you look back. We also held our general elections in July this year, and there were no spike in cases because of the general elections. So since the start of the pandemic in Singapore in January, February 2020, Singapore had about 58,000 cases in total until today. Out of these 58,000 cases, more than 90% of the cases are from the migrant worker population. More than 90%. The local community infection of Singaporeans are actually quite low. So my PM, Mr. Lee Hsien Loong, has promised that we will take good care of the migrant worker population. We will give them treatment, and we will still pay their employers will still pay their salaries, as they have made very important contribution to Singapore's development. Over the years, we are very dependent on migrant workers. So fast forward to today, more than 99%, I think it's more than 99.5% of the 58,000 cases have recovered. And many of them have gone back to work. Our hospitals were not overwhelmed. I think they have managed well, generally speaking. Our death number is 28, which is a death rate of less than 0.05%. I think probably one of the lowest in the world to date. Today, we are seeing less than 10 cases a day on average, and most of them are imported. The local community cases are not high. Our ICU has not seen a patient for probably quite a few months, no patient in ICU. The people who are continuing to be affected are today about 65 to 70 cases today. So our advanced medical facilities, our ability to do robust testing and also quick contact tracing, I think have made a difference. We are able to test about 30,000 tests today, and we are aiming to test up to 40,000 in the near future. So robust testing is very important, but contact tracing is equally important. So contact tracing, we have developed what is called a Trace Together program. This is either through a mobile phone app or through a token that the government is distributing for free to each citizen, still in the process of distributing. So that if there is any cases of positive COVID cases, you can trace very quickly before the spread gets out of control. So test and trace, very important. I think Singapore doesn't have a big population. Singapore is 5.7 million. People in Singapore are largely cooperative, and they understand the necessity to have strict social distancing, including putting on a face mask when they go out. But we are not complacent, we remain vigilant, but we cannot afford to close up forever. So the second aspect is to strike a balance between public health and reopening economy. That is very important. Singapore wants to resume normal economic activities while avoiding a new wave of infection. This requires a delicate balance, as I mentioned earlier. Our immediate task is to manage the COVID-19 cases at hand, but we are already looking at how to make Singapore even stronger in the post-COVID-19 world. You see, Singapore is very dependent on trade. We are very interconnected with the world, so we cannot afford to close up. But the decimation of air travel has affected us badly. Whether it is Changi Airport, whether it is Singapore Airlines, it has affected us greatly. So we have started to review our border measures and to implement progressive changes as we reopen to international travel. So we have set up what we call reciprocal green lanes. Some people call it fast track. This is to allow essential businessmen and officials to travel without the need to go through quarantine, but they do tests. They do 2 tests before they fly and 1 more test after they arrive. So if they are negative, they can carry on. Right now, what we are trying to do is to establish what we call an air travel bubble. Air travel bubble is probably one layer ahead of reciprocal green lane because this is for general travelers. Again, we are trying to use tests to replace quarantine. Yeah. So we have established RGLs with several countries, including with Korea, I think Germany as well, hopefully soon with Norway. And air travel bubble, we are going to set up with Hong Kong soon. And we have allowed, unilaterally, we have allowed several countries, Brunei, New Zealand, Australia, Vietnam, the people to come into Singapore, doing tests, then they can carry on their business. The third aspect that I'm going to talk about is multilateralism versus unilateralism. I think this is very important for a small country like Singapore. We have to ensure that multilateralism remains as relevant as ever when protectionism is in fashion today. So COVID-19, we know, respects no borders. Because of that, multilateral cooperation is even more important now. So Singapore, together with a handful of other like-minded countries, have stepped up efforts to take the lead to strengthen multilateralism amidst COVID-19. So we are advocating what is called vaccine multilateralism, rather than vaccine nationalism. I think that is very important, so that everyone, regardless of their wealth, can have fair and equitable global access of vaccines. We have formed and also, we have founded and also co-chair with Switzerland what is called the COVAX facility, or Friends of the COVAX facility. vaccine global access facility. So ROK is an important partner in that. I will sum up. We do not see Singapore's strategy of combating COVID-19 as the only model. Actually, there's no perfect model. Each country has their own unique challenges and circumstances. Other countries have also been successful in combating COVID-19. So New Zealand, for example, Republic of Korea, for example, and also a few European countries, including Norway, including Germany, when it was first started. I'm sure they have a system in place. They can put the infections under control. So our experience of using IT for both testing and contact tracing shows how a government can effectively build up what we call national resilience and unity to overcome the pandemic as one united people. I think that is very important for us. As I said at the beginning, leadership and public diplomacy goes hand in hand. Our continued active and vocal support for a multilateral approach to developing and distributing vaccines is in itself a public diplomacy effort. It's a very important public diplomacy effort. For a small country, as I said just now, Singapore is heavily dependent on the external environment. Such public diplomacy is extremely important. I will end here.
Thank you, Ambassador Teo. I think you emphasized the strong leadership that got Singapore through the, even the most difficult stages of the pandemic, and also in its efforts to really rebuild. Emphasis on multilateralism, especially in the dissemination of vaccines, which I think is a very important, and something that South Korea is also very strong about. Now, strong leadership in Europe, and we think of Germany, even though the whole of Europe is undergoing a difficult period at the time. Ambassador, could you talk about Germany's example in terms of how the leadership in Germany dealt with the pandemic?
My pleasure. First of all, many thanks for the invitation. I think it is a topic that could not be better chosen. Many thanks also to the Korean Foundation that we can do this. First of all, I simply wanted to reflect actually in the first wave of the pandemic. It was Korea, one of the countries where Germany was most interested in sharing experiences, because it was really very successful, and you had this advantage of timing. So we really tried to learn from your experience. On the other hand, as also my colleague said, every country does have different conditions. For example, in Germany, we have the special condition that we do have 10 bordering countries. That means Germany always is a very open country within the European Union, but also otherwise. And so we tried to find different answers to these challenges. What I would like to do is simply giving some short sentences. First of all, on our national approach. Secondly, because also in the second half of this year, we do have the presidency within the European Union. So it was also a huge challenge for the European Union, how to tackle this crisis and how to keep solidarity. And also as a third point, also mentioning what we tried to do on the multilateral level. It was rightly mentioned. I think one of the most important aspects is that we do show in this pandemic solidarity, that we do, for example, really distribute whatever the income level of a state is, that we do share the vaccine once it will be developed. And this is for us, we always call it, I think it's a real test for the whole of the world, whether we really want to engage in multilateralism or whether we simply want to go our own way. For us, we always give a very clear answer. Multilateralism, to our mind, is without any alternative. So perhaps on the national level, one has to keep in mind that we have a mixed competences within our system. That means basically for health, there is a very strong responsibility not of the federal state, but also of the 15 units. So that means one of the real challenges for the government, and also in particular for our chancellor, was really that there always had to be found some kind of common way that both the central government was willing to go, as well as the units. Now, speaking of the first wave, because I think now you all know we are just entering a second wave in Europe, and I don't know how it will result in the leadership issue, but I think in the first wave we could see that actually the leadership was by our government working, I would say, quite well. I think there are some reasons for this. One of it is we never actually because of our open borders, because of the European Union context, we never tried to get, let's say, to a zero level of infections, because this never would have been achieved. So the main approach actually of the German government was always to try to control the number of infections that actually the health system, what we do have in Germany, can cope with it. We did take rapid actions, for example, increasing the number of intensive care units and other measures at the hospitals. We increased very quickly the testing. And so I think we managed through this kind of measures to keep always the number of new infections at a level where actually the health system, the German health system in all parts of the country was really able to deal with it. A second aspect, this was also mentioned by my colleague Eric, we always try to strike a balance. On the one side, there are the costs of the COVID with regard to the health system, with regard to the life of people. But I think the other aspect one always has to keep into mind is what will be the costs for the economy, for employment, for poverty of people. So I think we always were trying to balance this out, and therefore, I mean, we have learned, if I may say so, from the financial crisis in 2008, where the government in Germany was hesitant to pump substantial amounts of money into the market, into the economy, to alleviate the situation for business. And this time we learned very quickly, we put substantial amounts of money available for German economy, but not only, for example, also for cultural institutions. They're one of the institutions most hardly hit, and I think we do need cultural institutions. And through this kind of balancing, I would say, fingers crossed, at least for the first wave, we were getting quite good through. We tried to do on the national level a third element, also to combine it actually with our policy approaches. For example, many of the available assets, of the money available, will be also used that we want to further goals, for example, like climate protection, like environmental issues. So we try also with the money for the economy that we actually push our overall policy goals and that we don't forget them, because I think issues like climate, like environment, they will remain even if we now do have this crisis. On the second issue of the European Union, it was for us a very, very unique experience growing up with open borders. I mean, you don't need a passport, you're simply traveling from one to the other country within the Schengen, so-called Schengen area. So I think it was for us a very, very unique experience that suddenly we did have to close the borders for a limited time period. And I think this is for the psychology in Europe very important, that we don't forget, even if we do have this crisis now, that we don't fall back on some kind of nationalistic answers. As a private commentary, I would say we had to struggle at the beginning with this, because the reflex was of every country first to take its own measures, and it did take a while until we understood that really we have to look for common approaches in the European Union. So I would say one of the really positive learnings of this COVID crisis is that we struggled, but in the end we were able really to find together and to find common answers, both with regard how we deal with the closure of borders and opening of borders, but also that we could find for the for the financing within the European framework. I mean, together with France, there was one proposal that was then basically accepted by most of the member states. That one really pumps also within the European Union a lot of money in order simply to enable business to overcome this, but also not only business, but also to keep social cohesion, what I think is one of the most important aspects, that we don't lose through this pandemic, that we don't lose the social cohesion. So it was, in the end, it was a fund, especially for this COVID-related measures, with more than 500 billion on the level of the European Union. And also with regard to the long-term financial framework, it was more than 1,200 billion euro, what will be for the next 6-7 years, the financial framework. And on the third level, on the international level, as I said at the beginning, it was really always very important for us that we make clear this is not the time now to go everybody hunting for its own vaccine, and that we really have to try to find some kind of solidarity between the rich countries, between the poorer countries, because in the end we are a global village, and only if we will be able to manage this as a global village, then we will also overcome this crisis. So we, on the financial aspect, we for example gave 200 million euro more to the World Health Organization, because I think they need it most. We also were supporting other COVID-related international multilateral aspects, because they are really important to us, and I think this is one of the most important challenges. Now, for the next months, the more we are in the phase of developing, testing the possible vaccines, that we really try to keep this multilateral approach ongoing, and that we really try to have a fair sharing. I think it will be in the interest of us all, and I think this is basically also within our membership of the Security Council at the moment is one of our goals. We want to strengthen multilateralism. Thank you.
Thank you, Ambassador Reifenstuel. I think Europe really faced a very unique situation where Europe is considered, especially the EU, a very open village, and it had to then cope with something that forced it to, at times, at least for certain amounts of time, shut borders and then deal with it, and then to return back to multilateralism, which is a very interesting process. Which actually brings me to our topic that I would like to get your opinion. Many of you have already talked about it, but the COVID-19's effect on the global environment for public diplomacy. Many of you talked about the fact that there's a deterioration of multilateral cooperation, and in this kind of environment, on the one hand, there is this dire need for each country to really step up its public diplomacy efforts to really try to win the hearts and minds of people. But on the other hand, people talk about the fact that because of this growing protectionism, isolationism, not only and what we face in the dissemination of vaccines, but even the global environment as a whole, we may actually be undermining these efforts for public diplomacy. Where do you think we will be heading? Maybe Ambassador Chang, if I'd like to ask you.
Thank you for the question. As I said earlier, COVID-19 has been a painful reminder of how interdependent we all are. Therefore, I would cast a vote for nations stepping up public diplomacy efforts in the near future. I believe that public diplomacy will serve as important medium leading to the global solidarity and cooperation. Korea is trying to make great efforts to share our information during the COVID-19 fighting with the international community and those countries in need. I hope it will help other countries to overcome the crisis. Thank you.
If any other ambassadors want to join in, you are most welcome. Yes, Ambassador.
Maybe just a brief comment, because I think what the COVID-19 situation has shown us is that tendencies we have seen now for a long time has been strengthened and not in a positive way, and the pressure on the international legal framework, our trade relations, our cooperation in general have been challenged for quite a few years. And I think that, as I said, has been underlined now during the COVID-19 situation. And I think that also underlines the importance of countries like ours supporting multilateralism, cooperation, that we need to continue the way we are doing, but also step up our efforts, that being supporting international corporations, the United Nations, the vaccine institutions, the World Health Organization, but also cooperating perhaps not only regionally, but also with in even more intense with groups of like-minded countries. And of course, information, digital, public diplomacy is a very important part of that. And as we have all touched upon, to be there with good analysis, to have a political leaders present, our experts present, to provide facts and information, because we need information more than ever.
Well, it's a good thing that you brought that up, because digital diplomacy, while it is sort of the buzzword of today and the future, there's also concern about the misinformation. The governments try to have this kind of open public diplomacy exchange with the public, but there's misinformation out there that is really a challenge to many. How does Norway and how any other country, if you would like to join in, how do you deal with this issue?
Well, I think, Professor, you put this in, it's a very important aspect, because we have seen that information nowadays and the platforms are available to anyone, whether these are institutions, organizations, nations, but also, of course, those who would like to disrupt the international cooperation or cooperation in general, whether those are troll factories or individuals all over the global society. And it's not an easy issue to address, but I think one of our weapons must be to provide fact-based information. We cannot succumb to those who would like to destroy. We just have to provide information. But that also means that we have to be present. And I think one of the answers that both our political leaders in Norway, but also different expert levels, is to be present on the different platforms, to provide just that, be active, show what we are doing, be present to share information about support to United Nations, to Gavi, to vaccine institutions, to our partner countries. We just have to be there. We cannot lose this fight. And information, fact-based presence, I think that's a key word.
I think we do have to be a lot more vigilant. I see the both ambassadors want to. Let's start with Germany, and then we have Singapore as well. Would you like to also add your comments?
Many thanks. I fully share what Frode, my Norwegian colleague, said. One remark is important for me, what I think we never should forget. Basically, the digital time that we are experiencing is most important because it's for the first time that actually worldwide information is democratized. Yeah? And I think that's always very important to keep in mind. Whatever challenge we are facing, in the end it's something very, very positive, because wherever you are on the globe, whether you are rich or not rich, you do have the possibility and access to information and to knowledge. So with every advantage, there are coming disadvantages. So I think it is, especially if we are speaking about public diplomacy, what means public diplomacy means basically the communication of states or government institutions with the public, domestically, but also internationally. So I think it is our task in two aspects. First of all, I think it's important to have legal frameworks. We do need some legal frameworks to counter this, both on the national level. We are also working on a European Union level on this, but also internationally. This is complex, but I think it's one aspect which cannot be forgotten. And the other aspect is simply, as governments, and now I'm speaking of our history, we have learned the most important of government communication is, you must have credibility. If you don't have credibility, then whatever you will use as your public diplomacy, people anyway will not believe it. So for us, the most important is against this kind of disinformation, misinformation campaigns. We have to make our own campaigns, but we always have to remain credible. We have to remain transparent, try to deliver the facts, what is actually true. And even if we will not be able to convince everybody, I think in the long run, this is the most important public diplomacy approach that actually a state or a government can take, never to lose the credibility.
Yep. Credibility is a very fragile but very important thing. Ambassador Tao?
I will just thank you very much. I will just add briefly on the topic of digital diplomacy. I think digital diplomacy is it's not a matter of choice. I think it is something that you have to do going forward, whether you have COVID or no COVID. Actually, my view is even with COVID, you need to do even more public diplomacy rather than less. So you take our embassy, for example. We only set up our Facebook, Singapore embassy in Korea, we only set up our Facebook post less than 2 years ago. Our Instagram was only set up very recently. So you take, for example, I went to Daegu. I visited Daegu, the epicenter of the Korea's COVID-19 infection. In August, during my National Day, I give out very, token of appreciation for healthcare workers in Korea to a key hospital in Daegu. It's called Dongsan Hospital. So I give out the products to them, and they were very appreciative. And we want to let more people understand our public diplomacy, and so we push out this information through our social media. So doing so is not only promoting public diplomacy, because public diplomacy in a sense is like for Singapore, we are promoting Singapore to Korean audience. But also what we call people diplomacy. I think in Korea you also have this distinction. People diplomacy is promoting Singapore to your own people, which is Singaporeans, right? So you have public diplomacy promoting towards Koreans, and people diplomacy promoting the same event, the same visit to Dongsan Hospital. Koreans knew about it, Singaporeans knew about it, and actually through that kind of public diplomacy acts, many Koreans, they come to know about our effort, and they make it more curious for them about Singapore. So I just want to say that actually with COVID-19, digital diplomacy becomes more important. I agree with my colleagues from Norway and Germany about the best way to deal with misinformation and falsehood is to push out the facts and push it up quickly before it gets,
Yes,
contaminated.
you have to be as quick as those.
Yes.
South Korea's digital diplomacy is very strong. How do you deal with all these issues, Ambassador Chang?
Let me add one thing about the transparency. Actually, the platform for digital diplomacy is very important. We are doing many efforts to invigorate SNS platforms to fight against disinformation. Not only fighting against the disinformation, but also let the foreign public better understand about Korea. Let me just add one thing about disinformation. This issue becomes a big challenge to the international community. And we may think of some technological problem solving, such as cracking down fake news making or spreading, or the fake news spreading accounts. But I think the fundamental solution may be the promotion of transparency in governmental policies. I'm sure that transparency will enhance the trust in the government policies, and it will lead to the prevention of fake news making and spreading. In this regard, Korea showed model case in fighting against COVID-19. The central and local governments they have provided timely, details, and they have disclosed all necessary information through twice a day interviews on websites, and also the text alerts, mobile apps. This kind of information sharing led to the more active civic participation in taking preventive measures against epidemics. So as a result, we were able to stop the spread of misinformation or infodemics, which might hinder effective the fighting against COVID-19.
It is something that we are all have to be very diligent about. Now, we could talk about this all day, but since we don't have all day, let me just sort of not end, but near the end, by sharing one of the questions that, I'll start with Singapore because it's sort of an Asian issue. They talk about the fact that strong leadership, that the fact that Asian countries were able to control the coronavirus in the beginning stages especially, is due to a different kind of Asian values where it is, we could do the strong contact tracing, strong government, strong leadership, and these just are not applicable in the West. Is that true?
Well, I'm not sure you can generalize to say that what work in Asia may not work in the Western world. I think, to me, at least, I think that is a little bit simplistic. Because even in Europe, there are countries which are more successful than others, right? And my two colleagues here are examples of that. And you look at, well, I don't know how you categorize New Zealand and Australia, but they are Western countries in a sense. And they have done well. New Zealand in particular have done well, and Australia, they have a second wave, especially in Victoria State, but they were able to overcome it with strict lockdowns, right? So I wouldn't conclude that what work in Asia cannot work in the Western world. I think what is key is whether the ruling government in power can mobilize its people together to undertake, if necessary, very strict social distancing measures and unite them, make them understand that why is this necessary, and based on science, based on evidence, not based on your mood. Then you unite them and then you bring them forward. They have to maybe be very suffer for 2 weeks or 4 weeks or even longer. But I think you have to make them realize that after the 4 weeks, after the 6 weeks, things will be much better. If you don't do that, things will be much worse. I think the leadership in this case is very, very important, in my view.
The leadership, whether it's Asian or non-Asian, is sort of the... So I think we were able to bust one myth. Let's approach another one, which is one is like, okay, well, which actually I'm thinking that maybe we shouldn't, but that female leadership has done much better. And since we have representatives from 2 countries who've had female leadership and have done really well, is there a factor to that? Either one, of course, Chancellor Merkel comes to mind, but either if you would like to speak on that, would be most welcome.
Well, I think we both
follow up.
But I think it's a very interesting question, and as you say, Professor, this is an issue that has been brought up, let's say, by the global media a few times during the pandemic. I would maybe not think that it has only to do with the pandemic situation as well, but we are also, with Eric and Jae-bok Chang here, we have representatives from countries with male leaders who have dealt with it exceptionally well as well. So I think it's difficult to categorize that female leadership, but that has had a special impact. But I think we can concur on the fact that most of the countries with female leaders have done relatively well, and there are very few countries with female leaders that have done bad. So maybe there's something to it. I think our perspective would be that you can always discuss, is this something to do with maybe some a more gentle approach. I mean, this, as we have touched upon, we never knew the answers. This has been a difficult situation to handle. I think sometimes it's must be permitted for our political leaders also to show a kind of uncertainty. I don't know if I should call it vulnerability, but to trust the advice from experts and not always push through. We have to address, now we have 4 male ambassadors here. Maybe sometimes we could learn something from that. But I think my general view and our view would be that a balanced leadership, whether it's female or male, but to have a balanced leadership in politics, in business life, in commercial, in companies, that gives the best results. And I think so a balanced leadership, a balanced approach is, in our view, the reply.
Would you like to add, or would you like to just agree?
Many things. First of all, I wanted to take up on the last question. I personally, I think it is always very dangerous, and this is only a short commentary from my side, to speak of Asian values, European values, Western values. I think this is a very, very dangerous discussion because, I mean, from our point of view, the basic values we all have enshrined in the United Nations Charter. So I think this is a very dangerous discussion, but this was only a very short commentary. On the female leadership, absolutely. I only can really agree to what Frode said. I think we made the experience what is simply very, very healthy, whether it's in business, whether it's in government, whether it's in administration, if there is a good mix of female and male personality. It gets different dynamics. I think this is also by many studies is proved. So I think from our side, I mean, you all know we are most happy that we did have Angela Merkel with her leadership for Germany, sometimes also for Europe, and I think she's an extraordinary leader. But I think in the end, it really does not depend whether it's now a male or a female leader, but what is really important to us, that we get more women into business, we are getting more women into our diplomatic service. We will have in 5-10 years much more female ambassadors, what I think is good. And I think this is the right way to go ahead. Many thanks.
Thank you. I think we are sort of out of time for the moment, if I'm correct. I mean, we have a number of other issues, and you've all provided very, very insightful thoughts on this issue, but I think we will have to wrap it up for today. Thank you all. I think we have really gotten a sense of how the leadership of your individual countries have really reacted to the global pandemic, and how that we can all pull together to really truly win the hearts and minds of the world in a time where actually we really, really do need such leadership. So I hope the best for all of your countries as well as Korea, and thank you all for your cooperation and participation. It was an honor to be able to host and to moderate this discussion. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.